Channel Gboot2786, Gavin Reshaw presents. Doing something a little bit differently. I'm doing an best impersonation of Harvey Superboy about recording a screenshot or Torian Rain. uh, Welcome to the ride. Whoever you are, wherever you are, thank you for joining this channel and please subscribe. Uh, the gentleman pictured here, some of you may or may not know, he recently passed away. His name was Earl Graves Sr. And this is a little tribute to Mr. Graves. Earl Graves Sr. was the founder and publisher of the largest black entrepreneurship magazine in the United States, Black Enterprise, that he created in 1970. Mr. Graves died on April 6, 2020 at approximately 9:22 p.m. according to his son, who is the CEO of Black Enterprise, Earl Graves Jr., Earl Butch Graves Jr. He passed away at 85 years old. He was survived by three sons, Earl Graves Jr., I believe Johnny Graves, as well as Michael Graves, if I'm not mistaken, and he had 8 grandchildren. Mr. Graves is predeceased, is preceded in death, by his wife Barbara Kidd Graves, who passed away in 2012. Johnny and Michael were his 3 sons. He has 8 grandchildren. He was born in 1935 in Bedford-Stuy section of Brooklyn, New York. Came from humble beginnings. He learned the lessons of hard work and perseverance from his parents, Earl Goodwin and Winifred Seeley Graves. He graduated with a BA at Morgan State University, historically black college and university. There's also a section of that school that is named after him. He gave, I believe, the largest grant to that school of about $1 million to Morgan State University. And during that time, he served in the United States Army. He held jobs as both in law enforcement and in real estate. And subsequently, how he came into acquiring Black Enterprise was after the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, United States Senator Robert F. Kennedy, in 1968. He actually served as an administrative assistant to Robert F. Kennedy in 1965, and he thought that his publication would provide blacks with a pathway to go into entrepreneurship. He once wrote, "Black Enterprise was just a modest magazine when I founded it. Just me, a few brave advertisers like Pepsi, ExxonMobil, and General Motors, and a small but spirited staff, and one other person who did just about everything there is to put out a magazine, my wife Barbara." The young publisher managed to gain a $250,000 loan from Chase Manhattan Bank and proved so masterful at selling and running the magazine that it became profitable in only 10 months, enabling Graves to repay the loan to the major financial institution. Now, what is interesting about Mr. Graves' business with Black Enterprise was that in the 1970s, at that time, while you did have black publications such as Ebony Magazine and Jet, which were owned by John Johnson, the Johnson Publishing Company, there was not one that focused squarely on entrepreneurship as what Mr. Graves aspired to. And he understood the power of the dollar, which is why he discovered, through his magazine, many black luminaries, business luminaries such as Oprah Winfrey, former American Express CEO Kenneth Chenoweth, Bob Johnson, billionaire deal maker, of course, Bob Johnson, creator of BET, the late financier Reginald Lewis. They were all graced on the pages of Black Enterprise. Robert Smith, who is the CEO, the billionaire CEO that actually made news a couple of years ago, paying for the scholarships of not the scholarships. He covered the tuition of all the boys. I believe it was at Morehouse College, if I'm not mistaken. He gave the commencement speech. He graced the cover of the magazine, and he admitted he switched careers to high finance after reading Black Enterprise. Graves once wrote, "The truth of the matter is that we are humbled by the achievements of the talented people we report on. We are in awe still by the courage it takes to put oneself on the line in an unmerciful marketplace. Again, Mr. Graves was a force in politics, civil rights, and philanthropy. Of course, he fought for African Americans to be on major corporations, the boards of major corporations, such as American Airlines, Daimler Chrysler, Rome, Haas, and Federated Department Stores, which was Macy's. He was a staunch. He actually served on those boards. I believe he also served on the executive board for the Aetna as well as the Boy Scouts of America. So Mr. Graves was very, very active in the community. And I'm even looking here, and he would report on Black Enterprise 100s, BE 100s, and that in Black Enterprise magazine was actually the 100 companies that had black-owned businesses. So annual rankings of the nation's largest black-owned businesses, and Black Enterprise appeared each of its 47 years. And Graves at one point operated the Pepsi Cola distribution company in Washington, D.C., which was at that time one of the largest soft drink distributors owned by an African American. And he also was a best-selling author. His book, How to Succeed in Business Without Being White, is a very classic, delightful book that you should all pick up and read and get. And one thing I will notice and say about Mr. Graves, if anyone notices that between him and John Johnson, have you noticed that the quality of the magazines have went down? Now, and even Essence magazine. Now, when you look at those, Ebony, which is obviously gone bankrupt. When you look at Jet, which is defunct before Ebony, Essence magazine, of course, that had its issues when their original owners were no longer a part of the companies, and actually they're making the decisions and guiding it in the right way. They all went down and so forth of the quality. I know one of my issues with Black Enterprise recently was they told something I couldn't even believe when they said Roland Martin actually reached hundreds of millions of viewers on his channel, which that is ludicrously false. It's not even true. But nevertheless, I have nothing but great respect for a man who obviously wanted to champion the black dollar. He wanted African Americans to succeed, and he did this at a time where we were told we could not succeed. In the darkest of times, when he started this idea during the assassinations of presidents. So nothing but respect and love to Earl Graves Sr. and to his family. May he rest in peace. I also just want to clarify some things to just what I said. The founder of Essence Magazine is actually Ed Lewis. He was the co-founder of Essence, and I don't believe he owns that anymore, although Essence is black owned now, but he obviously marketed towards women. And interestingly enough, it was created in 1970 at the same time Earl Graves created Black Enterprise. And I believe Mr. Graves and Mr. Lewis were good friends, if I'm not mistaken. Edward Lewis, Clarence Smith, Cecil Hollingsworth, and Jonathan Bloat founded Essence Communications in 1968, and they began publishing Essence in May 1970. And from looking at Black Enterprise, it was created, obviously, it's a multimedia company now that was created in first issue was 1970. They don't give you an exact date, but 1970. And, Mr. Graves championed, again, black capitalism. And he realized this is the way that African Americans can build success was through ownership and the development of several businesses. And so he reached out to different black owners of different companies, different businesses, that they could stay linked together. In fact, how Black Enterprise magazine started, if I'm not mistaken, is that he started it as a newsletter that when he got all the addresses of the different black businesses in, I believe, his area and eventually across the country, so that there could be a directory of sorts. And he knew obviously how to market and sell this off, especially if he was able to pay back a damn near $250,000 loan in 1970 in less than 10 months. That is hella successful. The editor-in-chief of Black Enterprise now is Derek T. Dingle. So they don't own that. And let's see, John Johnson, I'm just doing different things, guys. John Johnson's, let's see, when he founded, John H. Johnson, excuse me, not John L. Yeah, that's right. John Johnson founded Ebony in 1945. So wow, that was right around World War II was ending, and Jet was founded in 1951. And it was actually listed, and Johnson became in 1982 the first African American to appear on the Forbes 400. And he was named 1987 Black Enterprise Entrepreneur of the Year. So yeah, so I'm going through that, when I'm looking at this, guys, because these men were able to do something that no one thought could be done. And John H. Johnson also had something called the Negro Digest that he created in 1942, and it ceased publishing in 1976 when it became Black World. And it's possible. It's possible to succeed without being white. And Earl Graves certainly lived that by example. And so did these other men that I've mentioned. So, and you notice again the quality of the magazine. This is not a diss towards anyone personally, but I'm just saying that it's not the same with these men. And maybe that's because, a large part, because we live in different times. And I think also it has to deal with the fact that their creativity, their ideas that they had no choice but to succeed at that time and to keep things going, as opposed to now where multiple corporations can just buy out different companies. And unfortunately, that is what happened, obviously, with Ebony magazine, because I don't think that's black owned anymore. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, George Lucas tried to buy it, and his wife. I'm not sure. Someone can check that for me. But focusing again, Mr. Graves Sr. I know I said I was ending it on a good note, and then I went back. But you guys, please subscribe to this channel. Please I have a description down in the bottom of the box, and also a link to Black Enterprise magazine, where they give an obituary to the late, great Earl Graves Sr. Mr. Graves, please rest in peace. Much respect to the Graves family. Guys, I'm out, and y'all be safe and be blessed. Peace.